Hello, I'm Samara. Welcome to the Story Library, a place where forgotten letters, hidden diaries, and long-buried memories are given a voice once more. Tonight, I'm going to share a story that waited more than a century to be told. This is The Letter That Was Never Mailed. Prologue. Morning arrived quietly at Evelyn Carter's farmhouse in British Columbia, Canada, just as it had for decades. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the lace curtains, while robins greeted the dawn from the towering trees surrounding the old farmhouse. A gentle breeze stirred the branches, and the grandfather clock in the hallway announced the hour with its familiar chime. Evelyn opened her eyes and smiled. Another beautiful morning. She slipped into her well-worn slippers and made her way to the kitchen. Soon, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the house. Cradling her favourite ceramic mug, the one with the tiny crack near the handle, she stepped onto the wraparound porch. The rocking chair waited where it always had, overlooking the open fields beyond the garden. She settled into it with a contented sigh. Steam drifted from her coffee as birds sang overhead and a cool breeze brushed across her face. For several peaceful moments, she simply watched the world wake up. No regrets, no fear, only gratitude. A soft smile crossed her face. Barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I think you're ready now." The breeze carried the words away. She placed her mug on the small table beside her, closed her eyes, and leaned back into the rocking chair. It rocked gently, back and forth, back and forth, until it slowly came to rest. The birds continued singing. The wind chimes swayed softly in the distance. The morning carried on exactly as it always had. But inside the old farmhouse, a lifetime of carefully guarded secrets waited to be discovered. And one letter that had never been mailed was about to change everything. Chapter 1. The Call. Nearly an hour after the rocking chair had come to rest, Tom Walker turned onto the familiar gravel driveway. For more than 3 decades, Tom had cared for the Carter farm. What had begun as employment had grown into friendship, and eventually, family. Every morning, just after 8 o'clock, Tom stopped by the farmhouse before beginning his work. Evelyn was almost always waiting on the wraparound porch with a warm smile and a friendly wave. Today, the porch was quiet. The coffee mug still rested on the small table beside her. The rocking chair no longer moved. Tom climbed the wooden steps. "Morning, Evelyn." No answer. He smiled faintly. "Enjoying another beautiful sunrise?" Still, nothing. The smile slowly faded from his face. "Evelyn?" Tom stepped closer. Her hands rested peacefully in her lap. A gentle smile remained upon her face. She looked as though she had simply drifted to sleep while watching the sunrise. Tom removed his hat. His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." After several quiet moments, he reached for his phone. Later that morning, the family doctor confirmed what Tom already knew. Evelyn Carter had passed away peacefully. The farmhouse suddenly felt different. Not empty, but missing its heart. After the doctor and funeral home left, Tom walked slowly back into the kitchen. He remembered something Evelyn had told him only a few weeks earlier. "When the time comes, you'll know where to look." He opened the old recipe drawer. Beneath a stack of handwritten recipe cards rested a cream-coloured envelope. Written across the front, in Evelyn's familiar handwriting, were 2 simple words. "For Tom." He opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Tom, if you're reading this, then I've finally gone home. Please don't be sad for too long. I've been blessed with a beautiful life, surrounded by people I love. Thank you for taking care of this farm as though it were your own. More importantly, thank you for taking care of my family. I have one last favour to ask. Please call Richard Bennett. Then call Margaret. After that, Emma and Daniel. They'll know where they belong. Thank you for being one of the greatest friends I've ever known. With all my love, Evelyn." Tom carefully folded the letter. He looked around the quiet kitchen. Every corner held a memory. The smell of fresh bread, the laughter that filled holiday dinners, the countless mornings Evelyn had insisted he stay for coffee before heading out to the fields. He smiled through his tears. Then he picked up the telephone. His first call was to Richard Bennett, the Carter family's longtime attorney. Richard answered immediately. "Tom?" Tom struggled to find the words. "Richard, it's Evelyn." A long silence followed. Finally, Richard spoke. "I was afraid this day would come." "So was I." "I'll take care of everything from here." "Thank you." The next call was to Margaret Carter, Evelyn's only daughter. The heartbreaking news was met with stunned silence before Margaret quietly whispered, "I'll be there as soon as I can." Tom's third call was to Emma, the fourth to Daniel. Daniel listened without speaking. When the call ended, he slowly lowered the phone. Rebecca walked over and took his hand. Neither of them needed words. Across the room, their young son Noah looked up from the picture he had been drawing. "Dad?" Daniel knelt beside him. "Great-Grandma Evelyn went to heaven this morning." Noah's face fell. "Can we still go see the farm?" Daniel gently smiled. "Yes." "We're going home." As evening settled across the valley, the farmhouse stood quietly beneath the fading British Columbia sky. The porch light glowed warmly. The wind whispered through the evergreens, and somewhere within the old farmhouse, a secret had waited more than 100 years. It had survived time, war, loss, and generations of silence. Now, at last, it was waiting for the family Evelyn loved most. Chapter 2. Returning Home. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of soft grey clouds stretching across the mountains of British Columbia. A light mist drifted through towering cedar and Douglas fir trees as Emma Carter guided her SUV along the familiar country road. She had driven this highway countless times throughout her childhood. Every curve, every bridge, every mountain peak held a memory. Today, those memories felt heavier. She wasn't driving home for another family gathering, she was driving home to say goodbye. Rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windshield as the wipers swept back and forth. Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The closer she came to the farmhouse, the more the memories returned. She remembered riding this very road beside her father, Michael Carter. He always rolled the windows down so she could smell the pine trees. Her mother would laugh whenever the wind tangled her hair. Those were happy days, until the accident. Years had passed since the car crash that claimed both of her parents. Some losses never truly faded. After their deaths, Grandma Evelyn and Aunt Margaret had become the steady foundation beneath Emma and Daniel's lives. The farmhouse had become more than a place to visit. It became the place where birthdays were celebrated, Christmas mornings were shared, and broken hearts slowly began to heal. Her hands-free system chimed. Daniel. Emma answered. Hi. How far away are you? Daniel asked. About 40 minutes. We're about half an hour behind you. Emma smiled faintly. I figured Rebecca would make you stop for coffee. Daniel laughed quietly. You know her too well. How's Noah? Daniel glanced into the rearview mirror. Their son sat quietly in the back seat, carefully holding a folded drawing. He drew a picture for Grandma Evelyn. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. He still wants to give it to her. What did you tell him? Daniel sighed. I told him great-grandma is in heaven. He asked if heaven has farms. Emma smiled through her tears. And what did you say? I told him, if heaven has gardens, grandma's already planting flowers. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Emma said quietly, I've been thinking about Dad all morning. So have I. Daniel's voice softened. I keep thinking how different our lives would have been if he and Mum had lived. Emma nodded. But Grandma never let us feel alone. And neither did Aunt Margaret. No, Daniel smiled. They carried us through the hardest years. Emma looked out at the mountains. They gave us a home. I'll see you soon, Daniel said. Drive safely. You too. The call ended. Emma turned onto the narrow gravel lane leading to the Carter farmhouse. Towering evergreens lined both sides of the driveway like silent guardians. Beyond them stretched rolling green fields bordered by split-rail fences. The weathered red barn stood proudly beside the pasture. The old windmill turned lazily in the breeze. Everything looked exactly as she remembered, except the porch was empty. No familiar wave. No warm smile. No Grandma Evelyn waiting with a cup of coffee. Emma parked beside the farmhouse, but remained seated for a long moment. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Finally, she stepped out into the cool mountain air. The scent of rain, pine, and freshly cut hay surrounded her. Before she reached the porch, the front door opened. Tom Walker stepped outside. He smiled warmly, though grief showed plainly in his eyes. It's good to see you, Emma. She embraced him tightly. It's good to see you too, Tom. He gently squeezed her shoulder. Your Aunt Margaret is inside. Emma nodded. I've been dreading this. So has she. Emma stepped through the front door. The farmhouse felt exactly the same. The polished hardwood floors, the grandfather clock, the scent of cinnamon and old books. Every room carried Evelyn's presence. Margaret stood in the living room, arranging fresh flowers beneath Evelyn's favourite photograph. She turned as Emma entered. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Margaret crossed the room and wrapped Emma in a long embrace. "My sweet girl." Emma held her aunt tightly. "I still can't believe she's gone." Margaret brushed a tear from Emma's cheek. "Neither can I." A short while later, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Daniel climbed out first. Rebecca followed, helping Noah from the back seat. The little boy looked toward the porch. "Is great-grandma inside?" Daniel knelt beside him. "Nobody." "She's with Grandpa William." Noah looked up toward the cloudy sky. "Do you think they're all together?" Daniel smiled gently. "I do." Noah carefully held up his drawing. "I made this for her." Rebecca wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "I'm sure she knows." The family gathered together inside the old farmhouse. The house felt quieter than it ever had before. Yet somehow, it still felt like home. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly across the fields. Inside, the Carter family began sharing memories, comforting one another, and preparing to say goodbye to the woman who had held them together for so many years. None of them realized that Evelyn's final gift was waiting safely at Richard Bennett's law office, carefully protected until the day it would finally be placed into Emma's hands. A gift that held far more than polished wood and hidden compartments. It safeguarded a forgotten love story, a century-old promise, and a legacy that would forever change the way Emma and her family understood their past. Chapter 3. One Last Evening Together. The rain continued long into the afternoon. From the kitchen window, Emma watched tiny droplets race down the glass while fog settled gently over the surrounding fields. The farmhouse felt quieter than she had ever known it, not because it was empty, but because one familiar voice was missing. For as long as Emma could remember, Evelyn Carter had filled every room with warmth, whether she was humming while baking bread, laughing at one of Noah's stories, or reminding everyone to leave their muddy boots on the porch. The farmhouse had always been alive because of her. Now, only silence remained. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen. Tom Walker quietly filled several mugs before placing them on the large oak table. "Your grandmother would never forgive me if I let anyone sit here without a cup of coffee," he said with a faint smile. The family chuckled softly. It was exactly something Evelyn would have said. Rebecca handed Noah a mug of hot chocolate. He wrapped both hands around it and looked toward the empty rocking chair on the porch. "I keep thinking she's going to come back inside." No one answered. Daniel reached over and gently squeezed his son's shoulder. After a long silence, Aunt Margaret spoke. "Your grandmother believed this house should always be filled with conversation." She looked around the table. "So tonight?" "I think she'd want us to remember." Emma smiled through her tears. "I remember Christmas morning." Everyone looked toward her. "I was 6 years old. I woke up before sunrise because I couldn't wait to open presents. Grandma caught me sneaking downstairs." Daniel laughed. "You got caught?" "Oh, immediately." "I thought I was in trouble." "What happened?" Rebecca asked. Emma smiled. "She took me into the kitchen. We made cinnamon rolls together while everyone else was still asleep." Daniel nodded. "I remember waking up to the smell." Margaret laughed quietly. She told me she had an accomplice." The room grew lighter. For the first time that day, people smiled. Daniel looked toward the old grandfather clock. "My favourite memory was learning to fish. Grandma couldn't stand touching worms." Everyone laughed. "So what did she do?" Noah asked. Daniel grinned. "She used a stick to put the worm on my hook." Even Tom laughed. "That sounds exactly like Evelyn." Margaret looked toward the window. "My favourite memory wasn't a holiday. It was an ordinary Tuesday." Everyone turned toward her. "I came by after work. I was exhausted. Your grandmother sat me at this very table. She handed me a bowl of soup, and she said," Margaret's voice trembled, "No matter how difficult life becomes, you'll never have to face it alone." Silence settled over the room. Emma quietly reached across the table and took her aunt's hand. "She was right." Margaret nodded. "She always was." Tom stood and walked to the old sideboard. From the top drawer, he removed a worn leather photo album. "I thought you might want this." He placed it gently on the table. Emma opened the cover. Inside were photographs spanning nearly 60 years. Evelyn standing beside the farmhouse the day it was finished. Michael laughing as a young father while holding baby Emma. Daniel chasing chickens across the yard. Margaret planting roses with Evelyn. Rebecca and Daniel on their wedding day. Noah asleep on Evelyn's shoulder after his first fishing trip. Every photograph captured something precious. Not perfection, but love. As Emma carefully turned another page, a small photograph slipped from the album and floated onto the floor. She bent down and picked it up. It was much older than the others. The edges had yellowed with age. It showed a young woman standing beneath a large oak tree. On the back, written in elegant handwriting, were 3 words: "For Evelyn." Emma frowned. "I've never seen this before." Margaret leaned closer. "Neither have I." Tom adjusted his glasses. "I don't remember that photograph being in the album." Emma studied the unfamiliar face. Something about the young woman's eyes felt strangely familiar. She carefully tucked the photograph back inside the album. "Maybe Grandma meant for us to find it." Outside, the rain finally stopped. A beam of golden evening sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the farmhouse porch. The empty rocking chair swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, the Carter family remained gathered around the kitchen table, sharing stories, remembering laughter, holding one another a little closer. Tomorrow, they would lay Evelyn Carter to rest. None of them realized that the small photograph resting quietly inside the old album was the first thread in a mystery that stretched back more than 100 years. A mystery Evelyn had spent a lifetime protecting. Chapter 4. The Reading of the Will. The morning of Evelyn Carter's funeral arrived beneath a brilliant blue sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the rolling countryside as sunlight filtered through the towering evergreens surrounding the Carter family farmhouse. Inside, the house was unusually quiet. The laughter and conversations that had filled its rooms the evening before had given way to quiet reflection. Emma stood alone on the wraparound porch, a warm cup of coffee cradled between her hands. She gazed across the fields where morning mist still lingered above the grass. It was difficult to imagine returning here without seeing her grandmother sitting peacefully in her favourite rocking chair. The chair remained exactly where Evelyn had left it, motionless, waiting. Emma smiled sadly. "It still feels like you're here." The screen door creaked softly behind her. Margaret stepped onto the porch and gently placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. She loved this view. Emma nodded. "I understand why." For several quiet moments, neither woman spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with memories. Finally, Margaret glanced toward the driveway. "We should leave soon." Emma took one last look across the fields before following her aunt inside. The small country church stood less than 15 minutes from the farmhouse. Its white wooden steeple rose proudly against the clear morning sky. Friends, neighbours, and long-time customers from Carter Bookstore gathered quietly outside, greeting one another with warm embraces and heartfelt condolences. Evelyn Carter had touched countless lives. The turnout reflected that. Inside, soft piano music filled the sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colourful patterns across the polished wooden pews. At the front of the church rested a simple oak casket, surrounded by white lilies, lavender, and Evelyn's favourite yellow roses. Emma paused for a moment before taking her seat beside Daniel and Margaret. The service began with a quiet prayer. The pastor spoke warmly about Evelyn's life. He described her as a woman whose kindness never sought recognition. A woman who believed every stranger was simply a friend she hadn't met yet. A woman who loved books because she believed stories had the power to heal hearts. Emma smiled through her tears. That sounded exactly like her grandmother. Several friends shared memories. A former teacher spoke about Evelyn donating books to children who couldn't afford them. A local librarian recalled the countless afternoons Evelyn spent reading to young children during the summer. Each story revealed another piece of the woman Emma had always admired. When the service ended, family and friends slowly gathered outside beneath the warm afternoon sun. Conversations remained quiet. Some shared stories, others simply offered hugs. Emma wandered toward the old maple tree near the edge of the churchyard. From there, she could see the peaceful cemetery where Evelyn would soon rest beside her beloved husband, William Carter. Daniel joined her. Neither spoke for several moments. "I still can't believe she's gone," he finally said. Emma looked toward the cemetery. "I know. It feels like she's going to walk through the front door at any moment." Daniel smiled sadly. "Or tell us we're worrying too much." Emma laughed softly. "She probably would." A gentle voice interrupted them. "Emma?" She turned. A woman in her late 60s approached with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm Evelyn Brooks." Emma's expression brightened. "The bookstore?" Evelyn Brooks nodded. "That's right. Your grandmother gave me my very first job when I was 17 years old." Emma smiled. "She told me she hired someone who loved books as much as she did." Evelyn Brooks laughed softly. "I think I spent more time reading than working during those first few weeks." "I'm sure she noticed." "Oh, she noticed." But instead of scolding me, she handed me another book. The two women shared a gentle laugh. Evelyn Brooks's smile softened. Over the years, she became far more than my employer. She became my mentor, my teacher, and eventually, one of my dearest friends. Emma felt tears welling once again. She spoke about you often. I hope only the good stories. Emma smiled. I don't think Grandma believed there were any bad ones. Evelyn Brooks reached into her handbag and carefully removed a small package wrapped in cream-coloured paper and tied with a pale blue ribbon. She held it gently in both hands. Your grandmother asked me to give this to you. Emma instinctively reached for it. Evelyn Brooks smiled apologetically and pulled it back just slightly, but not yet. Emma looked puzzled. Evelyn made me promise that I wouldn't place this in your hands until after Richard Bennett finished reading her will. She smiled knowingly. And I never broke a promise to your grandmother. Emma nodded with understanding. I'll wait. I think that's exactly what she hoped you'd say. Just then, Richard Bennett approached. Dressed in a charcoal suit, the long-time family attorney greeted each of them warmly. Whenever you're ready, he said gently, we'll continue at my office. Margaret nodded. I think we're ready. Together, they made their way toward their cars. As Emma glanced back one last time at the church, she whispered softly, Goodbye, Grandma. The breeze stirred gently through the maple trees, almost as though someone had whispered goodbye in return. The drive into town was quiet. No one seemed eager to break the silence. Emma watched the familiar countryside pass by through the passenger window. Rolling pastures gave way to small country roads lined with towering evergreens. It was the same drive she had made countless times while visiting her grandparents. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Nearly 20 minutes later, they arrived at Richard Bennett's law office. The charming two-story brick building overlooked the town square, its neatly kept flower boxes overflowing with colourful blooms. A polished brass plaque beside the entrance read, Richard Bennett, Barrister and Solicitor. Richard held the front door open as everyone entered. The reception area felt warm and welcoming rather than formal. Bookshelves lined the walls. Family photographs rested among framed certificates. Fresh flowers brightened the room. It felt less like a law office and more like the office of someone who genuinely cared about the people he served. Richard led them into a spacious conference room. A large oak table stood in the centre. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows overlooking the square. Richard waited until everyone had taken a seat. Emma sat beside Daniel. Margaret sat across from them. Evelyn Brooks quietly took the chair nearest the window. Richard remained standing for a moment. He rested both hands on the leather portfolio lying before him. I've represented the Carter family for more than 30 years. His voice was calm, measured. During that time, Evelyn became much more than a client. She became someone I deeply respected. He looked around the room. I know this is a difficult day. But it was important to Evelyn that her wishes be shared with all of you personally. He slowly opened the portfolio. This document is the last will and testament of Evelyn Grace Carter. the room became perfectly still. Richard adjusted his glasses before beginning. To my beloved daughter, Margaret Carter. I leave the Carter family farmhouse together with the surrounding property. It has been our family's home for generations. My greatest hope is that its doors will always remain open to those we love. Margaret lowered her eyes. A single tear slipped quietly down her cheek. I'll take care of it, Mum. I promise. Richard offered her a gentle smile before continuing. To my grandson, Daniel Carter, I leave your father Michael's wristwatch. It reminded him that every moment is precious. It is my hope that it will now remind you of the same. Daniel swallowed hard. His father had worn that watch every day. I'll treasure it. Richard nodded quietly. I know you will. He carefully turned another page. Then his eyes found Emma. Emma Carter. There is something your grandmother wished only you to receive. Richard walked to a small antique cabinet standing against the wall. He unlocked its drawer with a brass key. From inside, he removed a dark blue velvet pouch. Returning to the table, he placed it gently before Emma. She carefully loosened the drawstring. Inside rested an ornate brass key unlike any she had ever seen. Its elegant bow was engraved with delicate fleur-de-lis. The shaft showed the beautiful wear that only many decades could create. Emma lifted it carefully. It felt surprisingly heavy in her hand. What does it open? Richard smiled softly. It belongs to a French secrétaire à cylindre. Emma looked puzzled. A what? Evelyn Brooks smiled. It's an antique writing desk. One of the most beautiful pieces I've ever seen. Richard nodded. Your grandmother treasured it for many years. In accordance with her wishes, the secrétaire is being safeguarded here at my office as part of her estate. It will be delivered to your cottage within the next few days. Emma studied the intricate key once more. Why did she leave it to me? Richard leaned back slightly. I asked Evelyn that same question. And what did she say? A faint smile crossed his face. She simply replied, when Emma is ready, she'll understand. Emma slowly closed her fingers around the key. For reasons she couldn't explain, holding it felt strangely comforting, almost familiar. Richard closed the portfolio. That concludes the formal reading of Evelyn Carter's last will and testament. No one spoke. For several quiet moments, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, Richard stood. There are a few estate documents I'll need each of you to sign before you leave. I'll take just a few minutes with each of you individually. Everyone nodded in understanding. Emma continued looking at the brass key resting in her palm. It wasn't simply an old key. She could feel it. Somehow, it represented the beginning of something. Emma remained seated for a few moments after the others had stood. The ornate brass key rested quietly in the palm of her hand. She traced the delicate fleur-de-lis with her thumb. For reasons she couldn't explain, it felt less like an inheritance and more like an invitation. Richard finished gathering the estate documents before walking over to her. There's one more thing your grandmother asked me to tell you. Emma looked up. She instructed me not to answer any questions about the secrétaire. Emma smiled faintly. That sounds exactly like Grandma. Richard chuckled. It certainly does. She believed the answers weren't meant to come from me. They were meant to come from whatever you discover. Emma slipped the key carefully into her purse. I suppose I'll have to be patient. I believe that was her intention. As Richard stepped away, Evelyn Brooks approached, carrying the small package wrapped in cream-coloured paper. She smiled warmly. I believe I've waited long enough. Emma smiled. So have I. Evelyn Brooks carefully placed the package into Emma's hands. Your grandmother made me promise I wouldn't give this to you until after Richard finished reading the will. I've carried it with me ever since. Emma gently untied the pale blue ribbon. Inside rested a beautiful silver bookmark. Its polished surface reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the conference room window. An inscription had been engraved across the centre. Every story finds the reader it was meant for. Emma ran her fingertips across the words. It's beautiful. Evelyn Brooks nodded. She used that bookmark nearly every day. Whenever someone asked her why she never replaced it, she'd simply smile and say, "Some stories deserve to stay with us forever." Emma looked up. I'll treasure it. I know you will. Evelyn Brooks hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There's something else your grandmother wanted you to know. Emma listened quietly. She never thought of the secrétaire as her greatest treasure. Emma frowned slightly. What do you mean? Evelyn Brooks smiled. She used to say, the desk is only the keeper. The real treasure is what it protects. Emma looked toward Richard. He simply smiled. It appears Evelyn planned every detail. I think she did. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the town square in warm golden light. People strolled along the sidewalks. Children laughed in the nearby park. Life carried on, completely unaware that, inside the quiet law office, one family's future had just begun to intertwine with a story more than a century old. As Emma prepared to leave, Richard walked with her to the front door. The delivery company will bring the secrétaire to your cottage in a few days. I've instructed them to handle it with the utmost care. Thank you. Richard paused before opening the door. Emma, she turned. Whatever your grandmother wanted you to find, I believe she chose the right person. Emma smiled softly. I hope so. She stepped outside. The cool afternoon breeze greeted her as she looked down at the brass key resting in her hand. One key, one antique desk, one unanswered question. Somewhere inside Richard Bennett's law office, safely protected for decades, waited Evelyn Carter's final gift. A gift that held far more than polished walnut and hidden compartments. It safeguarded a forgotten love story, a century-old promise, and a legacy that would forever change the way Emma and her family understood their past. Emma slipped the key into her purse. Without realizing it, she had just taken the first step toward uncovering a story that had been waiting more than 100 years to be told. Chapter 5. The Secret Within. 3 days had passed since Evelyn Carter's funeral. The farmhouse had grown quiet once more. After helping Aunt Margaret settle into the house and saying goodbye to Daniel, Rebecca, Noah, Tom Walker and Richard Bennett, Emma returned to her cottage overlooking a quiet lake in British Columbia. The drive home had been peaceful, yet her thoughts had never been louder. The brass key Richard Bennett had placed in her hand rested safely inside her purse. She hadn't looked at it since leaving the farmhouse. Early that afternoon, a delivery truck slowly pulled into her driveway. Emma stepped outside. The driver climbed down from the truck. "Emma Carter?" "Yes?" "I have a special delivery from Bennett and Associates." He handed her an electronic clipboard. "Your signature, please?" Emma signed. Moments later, the driver carefully wheeled a large wooden crate into her front room. "This is heavier than it looks," he said with a smile. "It must be something important." Emma smiled politely. "I think it is." After the truck disappeared down the road, silence returned. She stood looking at the crate for several moments. A shipping label caught her attention. "From the office of Richard Bennett. Handle with care." Emma found a small pry bar in the garage and carefully removed the wooden slats protecting the crate. Layer by layer, the packing material fell away. Then she saw it. The beautiful French secrétaire à cylindre. Even after decades, its polished walnut gleamed warmly beneath the afternoon sunlight pouring through the cottage windows. Delicate marquetry decorated the curved roll top. Elegant brass fittings reflected the light. It looked less like furniture and more like a treasured work of art. Emma slowly ran her fingertips across the smooth wood. "Grandma," she whispered. "So this is what you wanted me to have." She walked into the kitchen and retrieved the small velvet pouch Richard Bennett had given her after the reading of Evelyn's will. Inside rested the ornate brass key. Its engraved fleur-de-lis seemed even more beautiful now. Emma returned to the secrétaire. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Her grandmother had protected whatever lay inside for decades. Now, she was being asked to continue that responsibility. Taking a slow breath, Emma inserted the key into the lock. A soft click echoed through the quiet cottage. She gently lifted the curved roll top. It opened effortlessly, as though it had simply been waiting for her. Inside, everything had been arranged with extraordinary care. A leather-bound journal rested neatly in the centre. Beside it lay an elegant fountain pen, a faded black and white photograph, a small velvet pouch, and one cream-coloured envelope. Written across the front in Evelyn Carter's unmistakable handwriting were 2 simple words: "For Emma." Emma carefully picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then the secrétaire has finally found its way home. I always believed that one day it would belong to you, not because of what it is, but because of what it protects. Before you open the journal, before you examine the photograph, before you begin asking questions, I need you to promise me one thing. Be patient. Every answer you seek is here. But every great story deserves to be discovered one page at a time. When you are ready, open the journal. Everything begins there." with all my love, Grandma Evelyn. Emma slowly folded the letter. She looked at the journal resting inside the secrétaire. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Inside her quiet cottage, a story more than 100 years old waited patiently to be told. Emma reached toward the journal, then paused. Some moments were too important to rush. Chapter 6. May 3rd, 1917. Morning arrived quietly at Emma Carter's cottage. Soft sunlight shimmered across the lake as a gentle breeze stirred the towering evergreens surrounding the property. Inside, the cottage was peaceful. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, while the old clock quietly marked the beginning of a new day. Emma carried her favourite mug into the living room. The French secrétaire à cylindre stood exactly where the delivery men had placed it the afternoon before. Its polished walnut surface glowed warmly in the morning light. For a long moment, Emma simply looked at it. It no longer felt like furniture. It felt like a promise. A soft meow broke the silence. Safi, her affectionate Burman, padded gracefully across the hardwood floor and brushed against Emma's leg before jumping onto the sofa. Emma smiled. "I know. You don't think I should do this alone." Safi purred as Emma stroked her silky coat. Across the room, Prince sat near the secrétaire. Prince was usually grouchy and aloof, seemingly determined to care about absolutely nothing. Yet this morning, his amber eyes remained fixed on the antique desk. "You've been staring at it ever since it arrived," Emma whispered. Prince blinked once. Nothing more. Ace, her dark golden retriever, gently nudged her hand. He always seemed to know when anxiety was building before Emma did. "I'm okay," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. Ace stayed close. Emma carried her coffee to the secrétaire and unlocked it with the ornate brass key Evelyn had left for her. The curved roll top opened smoothly. Inside waited the leather-bound journal. Emma picked it up carefully. The worn cover felt soft beneath her fingertips. On the first page, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "The letter that was never mailed." Beneath the title was one sentence. "Some stories choose their own time to be told." Emma slowly turned the page. The handwriting changed, older, more delicate. She began to read. May 3rd, 1917. The morning sun rose over the vineyards of France, bathing the countryside in warm golden light. Rows of grapevines stretched toward the horizon, while birds welcomed another spring day. 19-year-old Élise Laurent stood beside the garden gate, her straw hat shielding her eyes from the early sun. She paused to admire the fields her family had tended for generations. War had changed many things, but mornings like this still reminded her that hope remained. Behind her, the heavy wooden door of the farmhouse opened with a familiar creak. "Élise?" She turned to see her mother, Guylaine Laurent, smiling warmly from the doorway. "Breakfast is getting cold." Élise laughed softly. "I'm coming, maman." Inside, the familiar scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen. Henri Laurent looked up from the day's newspaper as his daughter entered. "There you are. I thought perhaps you'd wandered off to talk to the birds again." "They listen better than you do, Papa," Élise teased. Henri laughed. "I suppose they've never argued with your mother." Guylaine smiled as she placed warm bread, homemade preserves, and fresh butter on the table. "For one morning, can we enjoy breakfast without the two of you teasing each other?" Elise leaned over and kissed her mother's cheek. "I'll try." Henri folded the newspaper. His smile faded slightly. News from the front covered nearly every page. Each headline carried another reminder that the Great War showed no sign of ending. He quietly set the paper aside. "No more war at the breakfast table." Guylaine nodded. "Not today." For a little while, the family simply enjoyed one another. Outside, the church bell echoed gently across the valley. Elise looked toward the open window. The lace curtains stirred in the morning breeze. Across the fields, she could see another farmhouse, the home of the Delacroix family. She smiled before she could stop herself. Guylaine noticed immediately. "I believe someone is already awake over there." Elise tried to hide her smile. "I don't know what you mean." Henri chuckled. "I think you know exactly what your mother means." At that very moment, across the vineyard, Luc Delacroix stepped out of his family's farmhouse, carrying a basket of tools. His father, Monsieur Delacroix, called after him from near the barn. "Don't forget to repair the north fence before noon." "I won't, Papa." His mother, Marguerite Delacroix, appeared in the doorway, carrying a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "You'll forget your lunch if I don't remind you." Luc kissed her cheek. "I'd be lost without you." She smiled. "And don't work too hard." Luc looked across the vineyards. For only a moment, his eyes met Elise's. Neither spoke. Chapter 7. The Letter. The morning sunlight slowly drifted across the hardwood floor of Emma Carter's cottage. Outside, gentle waves lapped against the shoreline, while a pair of loons called across the quiet lake. Inside, everything was still. Prince remained perched near the French secrétaire à cylindre. His sable coat glistened in the morning light as his amber eyes remained fixed on the open desk. He looked almost like a silent guardian. Safi had curled herself comfortably beside Emma on the sofa. Every so often, she nudged Emma's arm, as though reminding her to take a break. At Emma's feet, Ace rested quietly, his head lying across one paw. His ears twitched every time Emma turned another page. Emma smiled. "I think all three of you are just as curious as I am." She reached for the leather-bound journal once more. The aged paper felt delicate beneath her fingertips. She turned the page. Another handwritten note appeared. May 6th, 1917. Today, I finally found the courage to write the letter. Not because Luc had asked me to. He never would. He always believed promises should be spoken face to face. But war has a cruel way of stealing tomorrow from people who believe they still have time. So today, I wrote the words my heart could no longer keep hidden. Elise. Emma slowly turned the page. Folded neatly between the journal pages rested a single sheet of cream-coloured paper. Its edges had yellowed with age. A pale blue ribbon still held it closed. Emma carefully untied the ribbon. She unfolded the fragile page with extraordinary care. The elegant handwriting was unmistakably Elise's. My dearest Luc, if you are reading this, then perhaps I have finally found the courage to place these words into your hands. There are so many things I wish I could tell you whenever we walk through the vineyards together. Yet somehow, The words always disappear the moment you smile. You once told me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing love despite it. I have thought about those words every day. The war has changed our village. Families whisper instead of laugh. Church bells ring more often than wedding music. Every goodbye feels heavier than the one before. And still, when I see you across the vineyards, the world feels whole again. If tomorrow asks you to leave, please know this. No distance, no season, no war could ever lessen what I feel for you. Wherever life carries us, you will always have my heart. Forever. Elise. Emma lowered the letter. She didn't realize tears had filled her eyes until one landed softly on the page. What a beautiful way to love someone. She carefully placed the letter back inside the journal. Prince quietly jumped onto the nearby chair. His gaze never left the secrétaire. You really don't trust this desk, do you? Prince blinked once, nothing more. Safi stretched lazily before climbing into Emma's lap. Emma smiled and gently stroked her silky fur. I know. I'm crying again. Ace slowly stood and rested his head against Emma's knee. His warm brown eyes searched hers with quiet concern. Emma scratched behind his ears. You always know. She looked back toward the journal. One question echoed through her mind. If she wrote the letter, why wasn't it mailed? Almost as though the journal had heard her question, a small folded note slipped from between its pages. It drifted silently onto the hardwood floor. Emma bent down and picked it up. Across the outside, written in the same graceful handwriting, were 4 simple words. For after he leaves. Emma's heart began to race. She looked toward the next page of the journal. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the cedar trees. Inside, the cottage had become completely silent. Even Prince stopped moving. Emma carefully unfolded the note. Then, she took a slow, steady breath. Whatever she was about to read would change everything. Chapter 8. The Goodbye. Rain began falling softly against the windows of Emma's cottage. The peaceful morning had slowly given way to grey skies, and the lake beyond the glass rippled beneath the growing wind. Emma gently unfolded the second note she had discovered inside the journal. The handwriting was unmistakably Elise's. May 9th, 1917. Tomorrow, Luke leaves for the front. Everyone tells me to be brave. I smile because it comforts Mama. I speak confidently because Papa worries enough already. But tonight, I am afraid. Not of loving him, never that. I am afraid of all the words we may never have the chance to say. If this letter is never mailed, perhaps it was because fate believed our story was meant to be found by someone else, someone who would remember us. Elise. Emma slowly closed her eyes. The room felt impossibly still. Safi quietly climbed into her lap, purring as Emma gently stroked her soft fur. Prince remained near the French secrétaire à cylindre, watching silently from his favourite spot beside the antique desk. Ace lifted his head from the rug and walked over, resting it gently against Emma's knee. You always know, Emma whispered. She smiled through tears. Thank you. Emma turned the page. The village square buzzed with quiet conversation. Men loaded military wagons. Families embraced one another. Some smiled bravely. Others simply held on a little longer. Elise stood near the old stone fountain, twisting her gloves nervously in her hands. She searched the crowd. Then she saw him. Luc Delacroix. Their eyes met instantly. He smiled, the same smile that had brightened every ordinary day since they were children. Luc crossed the square. You came. Elise laughed softly. Did you really think I wouldn't? No. I only hoped. For a few precious moments, neither of them spoke. There seemed to be no words large enough for the moment they shared. Finally, Luc reached into his coat pocket. I have something for you. He placed a small silver locket in her hand. My grandmother gave it to my mother. My mother asked me to give it to the woman I love. Elise looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. She carefully opened the tiny locket. Inside rested 2 miniature photographs, one of Luc, one of Elise. She smiled. You already planned this? Luc laughed. I may have hoped. Elise closed the locket and wrapped her arms around him. I'll wear it every day. I know. Across the square, Henri Laurent quietly watched. Guylaine slipped her hand into his. They love each other. Henri nodded. I've known for years. Monsieur Delacroix approached slowly. He rested a hand on Luc's shoulder. Your train leaves soon. Luc nodded. I know. Marguerite Delacroix embraced Elise warmly. No matter what happens, you'll always have a place in our family. Elise struggled to answer. Thank you. The station bell rang in the distance. Time had run out. Luc gently took Elise's hands. When I come home, he smiled, I'm taking you to dinner. Elise laughed through her tears. Only dinner? I have something much bigger planned. She tilted her head. What? Luc leaned closer. You'll have to wait until I return. She smiled. I hate surprises. I know. He gently kissed her forehead. I'll come home. I promise. Elise wanted to believe him, with every part of her heart. She watched as Luc climbed aboard the waiting train. The whistle echoed across the valley. Slowly, the train began to move. Luc leaned from the window. I love you, Elise. She raised her hand. I love you too. The train disappeared around the bend. Elise remained standing on the platform long after it was gone. Only when silence returned did she reach into her coat pocket. The folded letter was still there. She looked at it, then toward the empty tracks. Quietly, she slipped the unopened letter back into her pocket. Not because she had changed her mind, but because she believed, soon, she would place it into Luc's hands herself. Emma slowly closed the journal. She looked toward the rain falling outside her cottage. The silence felt heavier now. She understood. The letter hadn't remained hidden because it wasn't important. It remained hidden because hope had convinced Elise there would always be another tomorrow. Emma looked toward the secrétaire. So that's why it was never mailed. Outside, the rain continued to fall across the lake. Inside, the story had only just begun. Chapter 9. Waiting for Letters. The gentle sound of rain tapping against the windows greeted Emma Carter as she carried a fresh cup of coffee into the living room. The French secrétaire à cylindre stood quietly beside the fireplace, its polished walnut glowing in the warm morning light. Emma smiled. I suppose we're continuing where we left off. Prince was already there. He sat beside the secrétaire, his amber eyes fixed on the open roll-top desk. He looked as though he had been standing guard all night. Emma chuckled softly. You've become quite protective of this old desk. Prince flicked the tip of his tail, but offered no other response. Safi immediately jumped onto the sofa beside Emma, rubbing against her arm before settling comfortably at her side, purring contentedly. She gently rubbed against Emma's arm before settling comfortably at her side, purring contentedly. Emma smiled and scratched beneath her chin. I was wondering when you'd join me. Ace wandered over from the kitchen. Without a sound, Ace laid down beside Emma's chair. His calm presence always seemed to make the room feel safer. Emma reached for the leather-bound journal. The familiar scent of aged paper and lavender rose from its pages as she carefully turned to the next entry. May 24th, 1917. It has been 2 weeks since Luke left. The mornings still begin the same. Papa rises before sunrise. Mama insists I eat more than I want. The chickens still complain whenever I'm late with their feed. The vineyards continue to grow as though the world has not changed. But everything feels different. Every afternoon, I wait for the postman. Every evening, I pray. Elise. Emma slowly turned the page. Tucked neatly inside was a folded envelope. Across the front, written in neat handwriting, were the words, My darling Elise. Emma unfolded it carefully. May 20th, 1917. My dearest Elise, I promised I would write the moment I could. Please don't worry about me. Training is exhausting, but my thoughts somehow always find their way back home. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can almost smell your mother's fresh bread. I imagine your father's laughter echoing across the vineyard. I even miss hearing your chickens arguing every morning. Funny, isn't it? War teaches a man that the smallest memories often become the most precious. Tell your parents I think of them often. Please thank your mother again for the scarf she knitted for me. I've worn it every cold morning. And tell your father I finally repaired the north fence, just as he insisted I should. I smile every time I think about it. Most of all, know this. No matter how many miles separate us, you are with me every day. Forever yours, Luke. Emma carefully folded the letter. A warm smile crossed her face. He kept every promise. She turned another page. The weeks passed slowly. Each morning, Henri Laurent walked the vineyards before sunrise. He worked harder than ever, not because the vines demanded it, but because hard work kept worry from taking over his thoughts. Sometimes he stopped and looked toward the road, hoping, waiting. Across the valley, Monsieur Delacroix repaired fences, sharpened tools, and tended the fields with the same quiet determination. He rarely spoke of Luc, but every evening he looked toward the horizon before going inside. Guylaine Laurent refused to let sorrow take root inside their home. Fresh flowers still decorated the kitchen table. Bread still baked every Thursday. She reminded Elise gently, "Hope needs caring for, just like the garden." Across the vineyards, Marguerite Delacroix lit a candle every evening before supper. She quietly whispered a prayer for every young man serving far from home, especially her son. One bright afternoon, the postman finally appeared. Elise hurried to the gate. "Anything today?" The elderly man smiled. "I believe so." He handed her another letter. Her hands trembled as she recognized Luc's handwriting. She waited until she reached the old oak tree before opening it. June 3rd, 1917. My beautiful Elise. Today I watched the sunrise and imagined you standing beside the vineyard, smiling the way you always do when spring arrives. Life here is noisy, busy, often frightening. Yet somehow, thinking of you quiets my heart. Promise me something. Keep laughing. Keep helping your parents. Keep believing that one day we'll walk those vineyards together again, when this war ends. I still owe you dinner, and perhaps, if you'll say yes, something much more important. Until then, carry me in your heart as I carry you in mine. With all my love, Luc. Emma slowly lowered the letter. She could already sense where the story was leading, yet she desperately wanted to belie. Emma looked down at the next page. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and shimmered across the lake. Inside, the cottage was peaceful, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this peace would not last. She turned the page and continued reading. Chapter 10. The Telegram. The morning dawned bright and clear over the vineyards of southern France. Sunlight shimmered across rows of grapevines as a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the valley. To anyone passing by, it looked like an ordinary day. Henri Laurent was already working among the vines before sunrise. He carefully inspected each row, pruning where needed, and quietly planning for the coming harvest. Across the yard, Guylaine Laurent hung freshly washed linens on the clothesline. She glanced toward the road every few moments, not because she expected company, because she hoped. Inside the farmhouse, Elise sat at the kitchen table with pen in hand. A blank sheet of paper rested before her. She smiled softly. "It's been 6 days," she whispered. "He's probably writing another letter." She dipped the fountain pen into the ink. My dearest Luc, summer is beginning to find its way into the vineyards. Papa says this year's grapes may be the best we've seen in years. Mama still insists I've become too thin. Some things never change. I hope you're eating well. I hope you're sleeping whenever you can. Most of all, I hope you know that every evening I look toward the western sky and wonder if you're looking at the same sunset. I miss you every single day. Forever yours, Elise. She carefully folded the unfinished letter. I'll finish it after your next letter arrives. Outside, Henri looked toward the neighbouring farm. Monsieur Delacroix stood repairing the old fence near the road. The two men exchanged a quiet wave. Neither needed words. Each understood the burden the other carried. Across the vineyard, Marguerite Delacroix stepped onto her porch carrying a basket of fresh bread. She smiled warmly toward Guylaine. Later, the two women met beside the stone fence separating their properties. I baked too much again, Marguerite laughed. Guylaine smiled. You always say that. And somehow there's never any left. For a few precious moments, they spoke of gardens, weather, and harvests. Neither mentioned the war. Neither mentioned their children. Hope sometimes lived in ordinary conversations. Just before noon, the distant sound of horse hooves echoed along the village road. Henri looked up. So did Monsieur Delacroix. A lone military courier approached, riding slowly toward the neighbouring farms. The conversation between the two women stopped. The village seemed to fall silent. Everyone knew what a military courier often carried. The horse came to a stop. The young soldier removed his cap. Good afternoon. His voice was respectful, quiet. He looked at the paper in his hands. I'm looking for Monsieur and Madame Delacroix. Marguerite's smile disappeared. Monsieur Delacroix slowly walked forward. I am Monsieur Delacroix. The courier lowered his eyes. I have an official telegram from the Ministry of War. No one moved. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. Marguerite's hands began to tremble. Henri instinctively stepped closer to Guylaine. Elise stood frozen in the farmhouse doorway. The courier extended the folded telegram. I'm very sorry. Monsieur Delacroix accepted it with shaking hands. For several long moments, he simply stared at the envelope, unable to open it. Marguerite quietly reached for his hand. We'll read it together. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The paper unfolded slowly. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. The colour drained from his face. The telegram slipped from his hand and fluttered to the ground. Marguerite caught him before he fell. Tears filled her eyes even before she picked up the paper. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she read aloud. To the Delacroix family. It is with profound regret that the Ministry of War informs you. She could not continue. The words blurred behind her tears. Across the yard, Elise felt her knees weaken. No, she whispered. No. Henri reached her just as she began to fall. Guylaine wrapped her arms around her daughter. No, Elise repeated, shaking her head. He promised. He promised he was coming home. Silence settled over the vineyards. No birds sang. No voices carried across the fields. Only the quiet sound of weeping filled the summer air. Emma slowly lowered the journal. Her hands trembled. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Before she realized it, Ace had risen from the rug and rested his head gently against her knee. Prince had left his place beside the French secrétaire à cylindre and now sat quietly near Emma's chair, watching her with unusual stillness. Safi climbed into Emma's lap and began to purr softly, pressing against her as if offering comfort. Emma stroked Safi's silky fur. "I wanted him to come hold," she whispered. A single tear slipped onto the page of the journal. She carefully wiped it away. Outside, the lake reflected the fading afternoon light. Inside the cottage, the room had never felt so quiet. Emma looked at the next page of the journal. She wasn't sure she was ready to continue, but she knew she had to. For Elise, for Luc, and for Grandma Evelyn. Chapter 11. A Day Too Late. Morning came without birdsong. A heavy silence settled over the Laurent farmhouse as grey clouds drifted slowly across the French countryside. The vineyards remained untouched. For the first time in years, Henri Laurent left the fields unworked. There seemed little point. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen table remained exactly as it had the day before. 3 untouched cups of coffee had long since grown cold. Guylaine Laurent quietly folded a dish towel before placing it back on the counter. She glanced toward the staircase. Elise hadn't come downstairs, not once. Henri slowly removed his hat. "I'll check on her." Guylaine nodded. "Tell her breakfast will be waiting." Henri climbed the old wooden stairs. He paused outside Elise's bedroom door. A faint knock. "My little bird?" No answer. He knocked again. "It's Papa." After a long silence, the door slowly opened. Elise stood before him. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked as though she hadn't slept. Henri gently smiled. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. The room felt strangely unchanged. Fresh flowers still rested on the windowsill. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains. On the small writing desk lay sheets of unfinished letters. Henri quietly looked around the room. "You've written to him every week?" Elise nodded. "But I never mailed the last one." Her voice trembled. I thought I'd give it to him myself when he came home." Henri's heart broke. She opened the top drawer of her writing desk. Carefully, she removed the familiar cream-coloured envelope tied with its pale blue ribbon. The very same letter, still unopened, still waiting. She held it against her chest. I was only 1 day too late. Tears streamed down her face. If I had mailed it. Henri gently placed his hands on her shoulders. My sweet girl. Luc never needed a letter to know you loved him. He carried your heart with him every day. Elise closed her eyes. I hope so. Henri embraced his daughter. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Downstairs, Guylaine quietly wiped away her own tears as she listened from the foot of the staircase. Across the vineyards, the Delacroix farmhouse stood equally silent. Monsieur Delacroix sat alone on the porch, Luc's wristwatch resting in his weathered hands. It had been returned with Luc's personal belongings. He slowly wound it. Tick, tick, tick. Time continued moving forward, even when hearts wished it would stop. Inside, Marguerite Delacroix carefully folded Luke's military jacket before placing it inside a cedar chest. She paused for a moment, then gently rested her hand upon it. "My beautiful boy, you'll always be home here." That afternoon, Elise walked alone to the old oak tree overlooking the vineyards, the same place where she and Luke had shared countless conversations. She sat beneath its broad branches. The letter remained in her hands. She untied the blue ribbon, read every word she had written, then folded it once more. Slowly, she placed it inside the leather-bound journal. Beneath it, she added a single sentence. May 18th, 1917. This letter was never mailed. Not because it wasn't written, not because it wasn't loved, but because I believed there would always be another tomorrow. If these pages are ever found, please remember him. Please remember us. Élise Laurent. Emma slowly lowered the journal. She couldn't hold back the tears. "So that's why," she whispered. "The letter stayed with you." Safi immediately climbed into Emma's lap, pressing close against her as she purred softly. Emma wrapped one arm around her. Prince, usually content to watch from a distance, quietly jumped onto the chair beside the French secrétaire à cylindre. He remained there, silent and watchful. Ace rested his head gently against Emma's knee. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You knew this chapter would be hard, didn't you?" Ace's tail thumped softly against the floor. Emma looked toward the window. The lake beyond her cottage reflected the fading evening light. She carefully placed Elise's letter back inside the journal. "I promise," she whispered. "I'll make sure no one ever forgets either of you." Outside, the wind stirred gently through the evergreens. Inside, the story had become more than history. It had become a promise passed from one generation to the next. Chapter 12. The Promise. The first light of dawn spread gently across the lake outside Emma Carter's cottage. A thin layer of mist floated over the still water as birds welcomed another beautiful morning. Inside the cottage, everything was quiet. The French secrétaire à cylindre remained open beside the fireplace. Its secrets had finally been revealed. Prince sat in his usual place beside the antique desk. He watched Emma with quiet curiosity, pretending not to care, while never wandering far away. Safi stretched gracefully before hopping onto the sofa. She immediately settled beside Emma, pressing against her arm as though reminding her she wasn't alone. Ace walked over and rested at Emma's feet. He sighed contentedly. Emma smiled. "I think Grandma would have loved seeing the three of you together." She picked up the journal once more. Only one envelope remained. It rested beneath the journal itself. Across the front, written in Evelyn Carter's elegant handwriting, were the words, "For Emma, my final letter." Emma took a slow breath before carefully opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dearest Emma, if you have reached this letter, then you've learned the story of Elise and Luke. You now know why I guarded their memories for so many years. But there is one final story you deserve to hear. In the spring of 1958, while visiting France, I wandered into a small antiques and bookshop in a quiet village not far from where the Laurent and Delacroix families had once lived. An elderly gentleman greeted me warmly. When he learned I loved old books and forgotten histories, he asked if I would like to see something that had never found a home. He brought out a beautiful French secrétaire à cylindre. Inside it rested a leather journal, several letters, a faded family photograph, and a small note. The note explained that the journal belonged to Elise Laurent. After her passing, it had remained in her family for many years. As time passed and generations changed, there was no one left who knew the whole story. The family believed the journal deserved to be preserved by someone who would value it. I spent the entire afternoon reading every page. By the time I reached the end, I was in tears. I realized I had not simply discovered a journal. I had been entrusted with 2 lives. That day, I made a promise. I would protect their story until I found someone with the same love for history, the same compassion, and the same respect for ordinary people whose lives deserved to be remembered. Emma, from the time you were a little girl, I watched you disappear into books. You never rushed through a story. You listened. You felt. You understood. Long before I wrote this letter, I knew you would one day become the next guardian of Elise and Luc's legacy. The secrétaire was never the true inheritance. Neither was the journal. The real inheritance is the responsibility to remember. Please tell their story. Not because they were famous, not because history books will ever mention their names, but because love like theirs deserves to live on. As long as someone remembers, no life is ever truly forgotten. With all my love, Grandma Evelyn. Emma folded the letter carefully. She looked toward the journal, then toward the photograph of the Laurent and Delacroix families. 6 smiling faces, forever frozen in a moment before the world changed. She gently placed the journal back inside the secrétaire. Not to hide it, but to protect it, exactly as Evelyn had done. Prince quietly jumped onto the chair beside the desk, his watchful amber eyes following Emma's every movement. Safi purred softly against Emma's shoulder. Ace rested his head against her knee. Emma laughed through her tears. I think we've all become guardians now. She walked to her writing desk overlooking the lake. A blank notebook waited. Beside it rested her favourite fountain pen. She opened the notebook. For a long moment, she simply stared at the empty page. Then she began to write. The letter that was never mailed. She paused, looked toward the secrétaire, and smiled. I promise, Grandma. I'll tell their story. Outside, the morning breeze rippled across the lake. Sunlight danced through the evergreens. Life continued, just as it always had. But inside the little cottage, a promise had been made. For decades, one grandmother had faithfully protected a forgotten love story. Now, Emma would carry that promise forward. Because stories are more than words on a page. They are memories. They are love. They are the voices of those who came before us. And as long as someone is willing to turn the page, those voices will never be silent again. The end. Thank you for spending this time with me here at the Story Library. Some stories make us smile, some leave us with tears, and some remind us that love, hope, and memories never truly disappear. If tonight's story touched your heart, I hope you'll return. Because somewhere on these shelves, another forgotten story is waiting to be discovered. Until next time, take care of the stories you hold close. Good night, and thank you for visiting the Story Library.